Sam's heart skipped a beat when, peering out the plane window, he saw a figure sprawled on the wing. Initially thinking it was a trick of the light, the reality of the situation sunk in as the figure moved. Passengers screamed and gathered, pressing against the windows, their expressions a mix of fear and curiosity. Sam, gripped by a chilling sense of dread, reached for his seatbelt, his mind racing with questions. Then, unbelievably, the figure sat up, locking eyes with Sam, and gestured ominously as if warning of imminent danger. Sam couldn't believe his eyes. The man was wearing some kind of mask, but his features were being morphed by the air rushing past the man's body. He wondered how on earth the man had enough strength to hold on to the wing this whole time, but little did he know that the man was only a small part of what was about to happen. Sam pulled his seatbelt as tightly as he could. He had a window seat so he could still see the man clearly. Suddenly, the plane began to shake, and the seatbelt sign turned on, prompting a burst of panic as the passengers rushed to their seats. "We're experiencing a bit of turbulence. Nothing to worry about," the pilot said over the intercom, not letting anyone know he was actually lying. The man was still on the plane's wing, and Sam couldn't keep his eyes off him. Suddenly, the plane began to lose altitude, and it looked like they were preparing to land. But when Sam looked down, all he saw was the ocean. But what was the man doing on the wing? Why did the pilot lie? And what will happen to Sam and the other passengers? It was supposed to be a 3-hour flight from Houston to Washington, D.C. Sam was on his way to speak at a big event, and he was looking over his notes one more time when he noticed the kid sitting in front of him had suddenly stopped moving around. She had been annoying Sam for the last 15 minutes, so it was very noticeable. He didn't think much of it at first, but when he suddenly heard more and more people gasp, he curiously looked up. Almost everyone sitting in front of him was looking out of the window, so of course he looked as well. For a moment, he thought his eyes were deceiving him as he saw a human figure lying on the airplane's wing. He blinked a few times, but the figure was still there. Suddenly it moved, and people began to scream. "There's someone on the wing," a woman yelled, causing panic inside the plane. Now almost everyone wanted to see what the woman was talking about, and they all stood up to try and look through the small windows on Sam's side, pressing against each other. If they had been on a boat, it had tipped over from all the weight suddenly shifting from one side to the other. The cabin crew did their best to get everyone back to their seats, but it was too late. A seed of panic had been planted, and it was growing fast. Sam reached for his seatbelt, wanting to be safe in case things went south. Out of nowhere, a man fell onto Sam's lap, having been pushed by someone too eager to look out the window. The man fell straight onto Sam's laptop, snapping it in half with his weight. "What the heck, man?" Sam yelled as he pushed the man off him and saw his broken laptop. He wanted to yell again, but the seatbelt sign turned on, watering the panic. People scrambled to their seats, tightening their belts like maniacs. Sam looked at the figure on the wing, who was now almost sitting upright and staring right into Sam's soul. It was like being in a trance, as all the sounds around Sam faded away, and it was only him and the figure left in the world. The man signed something, but Sam couldn't understand what it was. Just as Sam thought he was beginning to understand the man, the plane began to shake, and he was snapped back to reality. He looked around him at all the scared faces. Children were crying, people had their eyes pressed shut, and others stared in front of them, too afraid to look anywhere else. This was every flyer's worst nightmare. The sound of the pilot's voice reverberated through the intercom. "We're experiencing slight turbulence, nothing to worry about." Sam looked at the passenger sitting next to him and frowned. "Is he serious?" he whispered, but the person next to him was too scared to answer. He grabbed the armrests tightly, looking as if he was about to throw up. Knowing when to stop talking, Sam looked in front of him, his heart racing in his chest. He hadn't seen the cabin crew in a while and wondered if they were preparing for the worst. Suddenly, the plane began to lose attitude, and for a second, Sam thought they had arrived at their destination. But his relief was quickly dissolved when he looked down at the ground. As the plane continued its descent, Sam's eyes widened in horror. Below, instead of the familiar landscape of a runway, there was only the vast expanse of the ocean, getting ominously closer. Water splashed against the wing, and he could see waves churning as they approached. It felt like they were about to make a water landing. Sam glanced towards the galley where the cabin crew was visible. They were all buckled up tightly, bracing themselves. Their grim expressions confirmed Sam's worst fears. Something terrible was indeed imminent. The sight of their preparation sent a chill down his spine as the reality of the situation set in. Compelled to look again, Sam pressed his face against the window. The man on the wing was gone. His heart dropped. Had he fallen? He scanned the wing, the ocean below, but there was no sign of him. It was as if the man had vanished into thin air, leaving Sam to wonder if he had been a ghost all along. A terrible thought struck Sam. Had the man been thrown off by the turbulence? He imagined him plummeting into the cold, dark waters below. The thought was unbearable. He looked around at the other passengers, their faces etched with fear, and felt a deep, sinking feeling in his stomach. Just as Sam was about to turn away from the window, something caught his eye. A shadowy figure, like a hand, appeared briefly under the plane's wing and then disappeared. Was it the man or something else? This brief glimpse of movement was bizarre and left Sam puzzled and alarmed. Though everyone saw the man on the wing, the pilot hadn't said a word about it. Whispers and rumors swirled among the passengers. Sam looked around, seeing the worried faces. Why wasn't the pilot explaining anything? The tension in the cabin was palpable, with each minute stretching longer than the last. Conversations were hushed, filled with speculation and unease, making the atmosphere thick with anxiety. The plane seemed inches from the ocean. Everyone braced, clutching their armrests, expecting a crash. But the plane steadied, skimming just above the surface. Sam and the others exhaled in relief, their bodies tense. The engines roared louder, pulling the aircraft upward slightly. Relief was short-lived as confusion set in again. Faces pressed against windows, eyes wide with fear and relief mingled together. Sam squeezed his eyes shut, heart thumping wildly. When he dared to look again, land was underneath. It was a shocking sight. The passengers murmured, peering out, puzzled by the sudden appearance of terrain where seconds before there had only been water. Sam's confusion mirrored in the faces around him, as whispers grew louder, trying to make sense of the sudden change. The plane descended toward an island. Why here? Why were they even over the Pacific? None of it made sense. Sam and the passengers were flustered, trying to piece together the erratic journey from what should have been a routine flight to Washington, D.C. Anxiety filled the cabin as everyone braced for more surprises, their gazes fixed on the unfamiliar landscape below. Despite the confusion, the plane landed smoothly on the island's makeshift runway. No bumps, no screeching, just a gentle roll to a stop. Passengers glanced at each other, bewildered but relieved. Sam's mind raced with questions. Why here? What was going on with this flight? Uncertainty hung over them as they waited for the doors to open, not knowing what to expect next. Ladies and gentlemen, we need to handle a quick procedural matter. Please remain seated. The pilot's voice echoed through the intercom. Confusion and fear instantly filled the cabin as passengers whispered frantically among themselves. No one knew what a procedural matter meant, and in the absence of clear information, they all feared the worst. Murmurs turned to muffled cries as the tension thickened. "Let us out!" a woman screamed suddenly, her voice piercing the tense air as she leapt from her seat and dashed down the aisle. Her desperate cry echoed, adding to the growing panic. Passengers turned their heads, watching her frantic movements as she pushed past others. making her way towards the front with determination painted on her face. The cabin crew sprang into action, blocking the woman as she reached for the emergency exit. It took the strength of 2 flight attendants and a burly passenger to pull her back. Gentle words from another calm passenger finally soothed her, her body going limp with resignation as she allowed herself to be led back to her seat, still sobbing quietly. Despite the crew's efforts to maintain order, they remained tight-lipped about the situation. This silence only stirred the pot further, as no one wanted to stay inside the plane. Arguments broke out among the passengers, voices raised in a cacophony of demands and questions. The tension was palpable. Everyone seemed ready to demand answers or take drastic actions. "How will we get to Washington?" one man shouted, standing up. "Where are we? And where is the man?" Another passenger chimed in, her voice loud and urgent. The cabin was filled with uproar, everyone wanting answers but receiving none. Frustration boiled over as passengers began to confront the cabin crew, demanding transparency and information about their unexpected detour. Sam pressed his face against the window, spotting movement on the ground. People were bustling around, which made him think they might finally be let out. The sight sparked a glimmer of hope among the weary passengers, and they began to gather their belongings, anticipating an exit from their prolonged ordeal. Just as everyone was getting ready, the plane lurched forward. Sam's heart sank. The plane was moving again, but no one knew where to. Uncertainty gripped the cabin as passengers exchanged confused looks. Was the ordeal not over? The plane picked up speed, heading somewhere unknown. The plane didn't stop at the usual airport terminals, but drove past them. This unexpected route sparked a flurry of questions among the passengers. Were they going back up? Anxiety filled the cabin as the plane continued towards an unknown destination, far from any standard runway. In the distance, a large structure loomed, likely a hangar. The plane steered straight towards it. Sam and the others watched intently, trying to guess the reason. Could this be a standard procedure, or was something unusual at play? The proximity to the hangar suggested they wouldn't be flying again soon. The plane glided into the hangar and everything went silent. Passengers sat frozen, holding their breath, waiting for what would happen next. The engines shut down, and the abrupt quiet felt eerie. Eyes darted around and everyone waited, the tension almost tangible in the still air. From below, a clatter and bang echoed, sounding like people were moving inside the baggage hold. Sam, sitting above, felt the vibrations through the floor. His curiosity piqued. He listened intently, trying to discern what could be causing such a commotion right under the passengers' feet. The sounds were irregular, a mix of thumping and dragging that puzzled and alarmed the nearby seated passengers. With the seatbelt sign off, people began roaming the aisles, their voices raised in demand for explanations. Sam saw his chance. He slipped by the preoccupied cabin crew who were trying to soothe the anxious passengers. His heart raced as he moved stealthily towards the front of the plane, keenly aware of the crew's distraction as they dealt with the unrest. Reaching the cockpit door, Sam paused to knock, but stopped when he heard voices inside. The pilots were talking, their tones laced with concern. Sam's hand hovered over the door. The urge to interrupt wrestled with his desire to learn more. He pressed his ear closer, catching bits of their worried conversation. Tension filled his body as he stood, frozen, waiting for more clues. "I can't believe this happened," one pilot said, his voice a mix of worry and disbelief. Sam, still outside, leaned in, straining to hear more. They sounded genuinely distressed. His curiosity turned into concern as he waited, hoping to understand the gravity of the situation from their next words. He clung to the door, ears tuned to the pilot's troubled whispers inside. "We're going to lose our jobs," one pilot lamented suddenly. "They have to find him," replied the other, his tone urgent. It was clear they were discussing the mysterious man who had been seen on the wing. Sam felt a chill run down his spine as he realized the pilots were as in the dark about the man's fate as everyone else. The gravity of their words weighed heavily on him. Suddenly, someone tapped Sam on the shoulder. It was a cabin crew member, her expression stern. "What are you doing here?" she demanded, gesturing towards the seats. "Please go back to your seat immediately." Reluctantly, Sam turned around and started back, his mind still racing with the pilot's words and the unresolved mysteries. He felt a mix of frustration and anxiety as he complied with her request. As he walked back, a piercing scream erupted from the back of the plane. A passenger was pointing frantically out the window, her face a mask of terror. Everyone's attention snapped to the side of the plane, their bodies twisting in their seats to see what had caused such a fright. Sam quickened his pace, pushed by the urgency in the woman's voice and the alarmed faces around him. Sam bolted to his seat, pushing past startled passengers to get a better view. He shoved his way through the aisle, his heart pounding as he neared his window. The urgency and fear in the cabin built up as more passengers gathered, craning their necks to see outside. Everyone was desperate for a glimpse, their curiosity mixed with fear as they looked out. Outside, the man was clambering back atop the plane. Below him, officers had their guns drawn, pointed upwards. The scene was surreal, like something out of a high-stakes thriller. Sam watched, frozen, as the standoff unfolded. The tension among the onlookers was palpable, everyone holding their breath, eyes wide with disbelief and fear as the situation escalated. Shots rang out, sharp and loud against the hangar's walls. Everyone ducked instinctively, screams mingling with the sound of gunfire. Sam crouched down, his mind reeling. Fear gripped the cabin as passengers scrambled, some crying, others shouting. The reality of their situation had just escalated dramatically, pushing everyone to their emotional limits as they sought cover. No one on the plane knew who the man was or why he was there. He didn't appear dangerous or armed. Sam stared out the window, his confusion and fear growing. The passengers whispered among themselves, each trying to concoct a story that would make sense of the bizarre sighting. Their theories ranged from stowaways to supernatural apparitions, each more wild and speculative than the last. Looking out again, Sam saw the man lying on the wing, but now the cops were also climbing onto the plane. The officers moved cautiously, their presence escalating the situation further. Sam watched, spellbound by the scene unfolding right before his eyes as reality seemed to blur into fiction. The surreal spectacle held everyone's rapt attention, turning their fear into a morbid curiosity. Every passenger was glued to the windows, their faces pressed against the glass, trying to catch every detail of the drama playing out on the wing. It was like watching a real-life action movie. Meanwhile, unbeknownst to them, a new crisis was brewing right behind them, entirely unnoticed. The collective distraction made them oblivious to the danger that was quietly escalating within their own cabin. Suddenly, a loud noise snapped everyone's attention back inside. The woman who had previously tried to open the emergency exit had succeeded this time, while everyone else was distracted. Air rushed into the cabin, causing papers and loose items to whirl around as the sudden decompression startled everyone. Panic ensued as the reality of the open door hit the passengers, causing a chaotic scramble. The woman stood in the doorway, looking down at the ground, realizing just how high they were. Before she could move, one of the crew members lunged forward, grabbing her from behind. He pulled her back forcefully, away from the gaping exit, as passengers screamed and backed away from the open door. Her moment of reckless curiosity nearly became a disaster, saved by the quick action of the crew. The crew members were scolding the woman loudly for opening the emergency exit, calling her actions reckless and dangerous. Meanwhile, Sam's attention was divided. He kept turning his head from the drama unfolding inside to the scene outside the plane, where the mysterious man's fate was being decided by the police. Finally, Sam saw the man being handcuffed and escorted away by the police. Relief washed over him as he watched the officers lead the man towards a police vehicle parked near the hangar. It seemed the ordeal might finally be over, but so many questions remained unanswered. As the man was taken away, spontaneous applause broke out among the passengers. Relief was palpable in the cabin, yet the clapping was mingled with a sense of bewilderment. Everyone was relieved, yet still anxious about what would happen next. They all shared a collective desire for answers and a conclusion to the chaos. All the passengers were then guided to leave the plane through the emergency exit that had been opened earlier. They gathered outside on the tarmac, clustering together as they took in the fresh air, visibly shaken but glad to be safe on solid ground once again. After a few tense minutes of waiting on the tarmac, a bus arrived to transport them to the main airport terminal. Everyone boarded the bus, eager to leave the scene behind. They looked forward to settling down, processing the events, and figuring out their next steps once they reached the terminal. Once they arrived at the airport, an announcement gave them two options: return home or continue to Washington on another flight. Sam, along with the other passengers, weighed his options. The day had been long and full of surprises, and the idea of another flight was hardly appealing, but his commitment in Washington was important. Curiosity got the better of Sam, and he asked an airport employee about the mysterious man on the wing. The employee disclosed that the man was a refugee trying to hitch a free ride in the baggage hold before being caught. Sam was stunned by the desperation such an act entailed, reflecting on the lengths some go to for hope. As he contemplated the refugee's plight, Sam's phone buzzed relentlessly. He had missed his conference, and his inbox was flooded with messages from his manager demanding an explanation. Each vibration was a reminder of the real-world implications of today's delay and the fallout he now faced. With his job potentially at risk, Sam knew he needed to manage the situation delicately. He began crafting replies, explaining the day's chaos and citing the extraordinary circumstances. Thankfully, the incident had been covered by the news, providing him with the external validation needed to corroborate his story to his skeptical boss. Sam's efforts at damage control paid off when his boss called to confirm he'd seen the news. The widespread coverage of the bizarre airport incident validated Sam's explanation, easing the tension with his manager. Relieved but exhausted from the day's events, Sam pondered his next steps, hoping for some semblance of normalcy soon. After the day's chaos, Sam decided to head home and rest. His mind was swirling with the events he had witnessed, and he needed time to process everything. Once home, he collapsed into his favorite chair, letting the quiet of his own space wash over him, a stark contrast to the day's tumult. The silence was a balm, helping him to slowly unwind and reflect on the surreal experiences. Sam uploaded the videos he had taken during the incident to his online profiles. They quickly gained traction, capturing the attention of thousands. The raw footage brought reality to his story, and soon he was contacted by a news show, inviting him to discuss his experience on national television. His account became a focal point for discussions about airline safety and unusual incidents. The refugee who had tried to hitch a free flight was officially charged. The news spread among the community and online, sparking a mix of sympathy and outrage. Sam followed the developments closely, his thoughts complex as he reflected on the desperation that must have driven the man to such extremes. This case highlighted issues far beyond simple legalities, touching on human rights and desperation. The incident left Sam uneasy about flying, a shadow of anxiety that lingered each time he thought about airplanes. However, determined not to let fear dictate his life, he faced it head-on. Gradually, with each flight, the anxiety diminished, allowing him to reclaim the confidence he had lost. His journey of recovery was challenging, but essential to his sense of freedom and adventure. Do you like this touching and surprising story? If so, we invite you to leave us a comment expressing your opinion. If you want to continue enjoying inspiring stories like this one, subscribe to our channel or check out the other videos shown at the bottom of the screen. Thank you for your cooperation.